We're going to be discussing the 2009 horror film. I guess it is a horror film technically. Triangle. This movie came, I think, straight to DVD. I don't remember anything about this in the theaters. Perhaps Ben can correct me when he kind of takes over here. But this, to me, this film went totally under the radar with me. I think I first remember seeing it like on Netflix or Hulu or something, and it just looked interesting. And I went to Rotten Tomatoes, and the score for the movie was way higher than like most horror films. And so that was like my little like check mark to give it a shot. And I remember watching it thinking it did the Bermuda Triangle time lapse circle thing better than most films that I've seen try to do it. So I was surprised, or I shouldn't say, I probably shouldn't have been surprised that Ben chose for his first film to review as part of this podcast project, Triangle. So I'm curious why, Ben, you chose this film. What exactly about this movie made it your first choice in terms of a horror film to review? Why do you like it so much?
What I look for in horror films is one of two experiences. The first kind of experience I had watching the original Wreck with my wife, where about an hour in, we hit the pause button, stepped outside for a smoke break, stopped by the tool room on our way, each grabbed a ball-peen hammer, and had our smoke break clutching hammers, looking over our shoulder. That's the one kind of experience. The other one is the one that I got watching Triangle with my wife, where we were staring at the screen the entire time. We didn't take a break. And when the credits started rolling, we looked at each other, each put a hand on the other's face and said, "It is going to be okay." I can't say enough about this movie. They set out to do something very difficult, and they did a masterful job of it. Everybody involved in this was absolutely on point, top of the game. The film continuity is immaculate, absolutely immaculate, which is awesome because the film continuity is part of what tells the story.
What I really liked about this movie is that there really was no like external monster, right? That's preying on things. When you find out it's you're the culprit, you're the one killing people, you're the antagonist of your own story. Man, that's kind of a trip. I remember actually distinctly watching, just like you, watching that scene with my wife. We watched this movie. I knew she would like this. She doesn't really like horror movies where there's a lot of violence or blood or monsters. And so this one was kind of, I figured, would be right up her alley. Female protagonist, all that something. And all right, let's watch this. And I remember just looking at her face when she found out it was Jess, and you could just see all the light bulbs going off. And I dig films that can do that the right way and then also end without disappointing you. And I felt like this movie had that kind of an ending for me. We can discuss kind of the interpretation of how you think the film ended and what it meant, but it followed through, I felt, in a way that was satisfactory to me, which usually doesn't happen in horror films, or really any film that has time loops and shit like that.
The thing about this kind of film is that once they reveal the mechanism, once they show you, okay, it was Jess in the hood at the beginning. She did have the shotgun. She is, and the way that we've my wife and I, when we were talking about this, we broke it down to and good on wardrobe department for this. Sweater Jess, when she first gets off the yacht, she's wearing a sweater. The second she gets into a reboot, the first reboot, she loses the sweater. So she's now tank top Jess. And then there's coveralls Jess, but there isn't one coveralls Jess. We see at least two versions of coveralls Jess in our playthrough these events. Once this mechanism is spooled out, it's very, very easy for that to kind of be it. Like, now we're just going to work our way through to the end, eliminating the necessary cast members, and then roll credits. And there's nothing else to hit you with. This one was saving it, absolutely saving it. We get the mechanism pretty well established. Not even half an hour into the movie, we've got a pretty good idea of what's going on. And the reveal that Jess was the antagonist all along is not much later than that. Like, by the time all of the cards are on the table, We're not even halfway through the movie, but all of the cards are not on the table by any stretch of the imagination. We don't get all of the cards on the table until she washes up on the beach. But then we're getting into interpreting the end.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you. I liked that about halfway point in the movie, you get what's going on, and the film goes, it still has more to offer, right? It's just, okay, well, we've set it up. Most horror films would end that way. I can think of many that actually end with that being the twist, and you're like, oh shit, and then you don't ever really think of the movie again. You're just kind of like, oh, that was a good movie. Twist ending, M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong style, and that's it, right? This took that and said, no, let's go a step further. Let's make it, and not only that, let's make it more meaningful, right? So what I really liked about this movie was that this is a film sort of about like a ghost ship, Bermuda Triangle, out there sort of horror film, but it's not. It's actually a movie about Jess. It puts the emphasis away from the phenomena of, you know, the situation and that kind of supernatural thing that's going on, and puts a very existential rub to it. This is exacerbated by an amazing soundtrack, which sort of caught me off guard in a similar fashion to how it did in It Follows, where it plays such an integral role in giving you the lens and the vehicle through which you sort of ingest the movie, as it were. No pun intended, ingest, but that was weird. But yeah, like it was a very especially the second time watching it, I felt like this movie was much less about being stuck in a Sisyphean sort of loop, and more about regret and a woman who did something terrible. And I mean, that's, and maybe we can get into maybe how we interpret why she's going through this, what exactly is happening. But to me, there was a real existential rub to this film that overshadowed the phenomena. And I can't think of a lot of horror movies that do that well.
Absolutely. And so the mechanics of why does this work? Why does this happen? We never get an explanation, and thank goodness for it. An effortless way to ruin the entire experience would have been having somebody step in about an hour into the movie and say, "Mwahaha, I have there was a time travel malfunction, and now you were caught in this loop forever." Ha ha.
Yeah, Dr. Mendez pops in out of nowhere. Yeah, yeah.
They're being they're being. This doesn't need a reason why. This doesn't need a reason why. This is a great example of a rule-driven movie. The mechanics are absolutely vital to what's going on. They drive the drama. They also drive the psychological tension. In that, in order to reset the loop, she has to kill everybody. So it's absolutely a plot-driving set of mechanics. But we don't need to know why. And we don't need to be distracted with the question of why. Although I do have a guess. I
was going to ask, because I felt like the film implied a why, sort of, right? So what? Okay, so right, just I'll go for it. Like, what is your why? Right? We don't need to go too far into it, but I want to see how you took what the film offered you in terms of offering a reason why this is happening.
Before we get to what exactly I think is going on, I think we have to start a little bit further back with another question.
Okay.
At the start of the movie, how many times has Jess been through the loop? The first scene where they give us a really good indication of how many times this has been going, how many times this has run through, the pile of lockets. When she loses her locket through the grate.
Yeah, she sees them down there. Birds, same thing with the birds.
But the pile of lockets is especially significant because in order for that to have reciprocated, she has to have gotten her locket back after washing up on the beach. The lockets, the number of lockets in that pile, and it looked like a pretty deep pile.
Yeah.
It's the number of times she has killed herself.
Yeah.
At a minimum, that's the number of times that she's killed the sundress version of Jess, who, we'll note, has never gotten onto the boat. Sundress Jess never, always gets murdered.
Agreed.
by post Beach Jess.
Hmm.
And that pile of lockets is a tally at a minimum of how many times that has occurred. She
Okay.
could have lost her locket somewhere else.
Okay. So let's assume 30 plus, dozens, maybe hundreds, right? So we have that in mind. Connect the dots for me. So this has happened a whole bunch of times to Jess. Why? Well, I mean, I have an idea of what I think happened. I think she killed her son.
Yes, absolutely. Everybody that dies in the loop dies every loop. So she killed
She
the
definitely killed her son.
smack that we saw. She loses her temper, smacks her son. I think she killed him.
Yeah, I do too. And this is echoed in other little things in the film. For example, where she checks her watch and it's 8:17, and the time on the boat is 8:17, but no one else has the same time. It's her. It's stopped at 8:17. Right? There's something different about her. This is her punishment. This is her. This is her purgatory. However you want to describe it. This is about Jess, no doubt.
Absolutely about Jess. And that mechanism of the why, and that this is a hell, not necessarily of her own construction, but one into which she enters voluntarily.
Yeah.
Is underlined with the character in the entire movie whose reactions are the least appropriate to what's going on, which is the cab driver after the car crash.
Yeah, I heavily implied, the film heavily implied that was a representative of death, or the messenger of death, or the ferry boat fellow who takes her to wherever she needs to go, right? He says, you're going to come back, right? And she says, yeah. And he says, okay, well, like, I'll keep the meter running, right? Like, to me, that sort of, and without segueing too hard into anything else, but to me, that's also one of the other things I really liked about the movie, is that whether we assume in the film that Jess is dead or alive, I don't think it really changed the fact that what's sought after in this film is so different than all of the other films we've reviewed. And it's so different than all of the other films that scare me. And in that, I mean, you take an It Follows, or you take, a Let the Right One In, or any other film, and there's these really clear components that these elements that you're left to ponder. So in It Follows, for example, and in some of the films that I like, you're meant to contemplate the idea of dying, or not being, or non-existing, or death. And I don't mean it's how you get there, right? We went through this. It's not exactly how you die, but it's just contemplating and thinking about the concept itself of dying. And death is somewhere in all of the films that I like, all of the horror films that I like. Something like that is in those films. This film is like the flip of that to me. This film is like, it's death. Death would be good if we contemplate Jess's scenario of being locked into a sentient, conscious mode of going through an ellipses of the same sort of scenario over and over again. The film presents you with a protagonist who should be looking at death in a very opposite way of all of the other protagonists and all of the other films that I've watched. Death is not bad in this movie. What's bad is that sort of Sisyphean up and down, that constant, that being locked, that sort of fatalistic mode that you find yourself in. And death plays a very different role in this movie. And it just struck me as literally a flip of all of the other films that we've reviewed that I've found scary.
I think I absolutely, that if it were Jess to die, we'd be looking at a different scenario. But that's not the only way to break this. That's not the only way out. Hence the cab driver. He doesn't say, "Would you like to go to the harbor?" He doesn't throw her in the back of the cab and take her to the beginning point again. He asks, "Where would you like to go?" This is a totally open-ended question, and she picks the harbor, which to me was the crowning horror of this entire scenario, of this entire cycle, is she wasn't caught in this situation where she is forced to kill these people and fails to save her son and fails to undo the damage that she has done.
She's creating it.
She has created it. And at that point in time, our first experience of this narrative. Um, it's happened dozens of times. She has chosen dozens of times, no matter how many times she is presented with the evidence that this is going to play out the same way every time. And she does not know. At no point are we given any kind of instruction as to whether these other people are real. We don't know whether or not the suffering that she is inflicting on other people is real suffering. But just going off of what we see, the evidence of our eyes, there's every reason to believe that it is. This is a thing that she is choosing to create, that she is choosing to reciprocate, and choosing to drag all of these people into, in this desperate hope that, contrary to all available evidence, this time it's going to be different. Even though she knows that the only way to navigate through the loop is to kill everybody that got onto the boat more than once. That is, to her, an acceptable price tag for an infinitesimal chance that this time she and her son make it another half-mile down the road before getting T-boned by a semi or running off a bridge or whatever the next way that it goes bad is.
So let's take that. Let's pursue that, right? So what's underneath that fear? For me, the fear that I got in this movie is connected to what you're saying, but it's a little different, right? So for me, the main fear I feel like drawn out in this film is the fear of, it's the same fear in kind, I hate to always harp back on Nietzsche because I love Nietzsche, but like in the eternal return, the idea of like consistently going through over and over again, either components, particular time frames, areas of your life that, let's say, were, you regret certain decisions and they were like very negative to you, or maybe even your entire life. But like the idea of contemplating your same existence over and over again, not to say that the film provides you with that, but I think it draws on that fear. I think the reason, the sort of person who would be scared in this movie, I think, is the person who either A, is someone who loops themselves into their regrets and thinks about constantly the things they've done wrong or they wish they would have changed. I feel like the movie draws on those fears. Or B, it's the person who looks at their life where at whatever point they're in and says, I really wish I would have done all of this differently, right? I feel like this movie, if you fall into one of those two categories, which I actually think a lot of people do, maybe most, but if you're contemplative and you think about those things and that's you, I feel like this film is gonna take advantage of you. Like that's the fear, that's the motivation that I see causing this movie to be so damn scary, maybe to you and definitely to me.
There's definitely hints of kind of a soft post-traumatic stress disorder in the experience of watching this movie. The horror of memory, and especially the idea of intrusive memory. Walking down the road and that moment is back. It was 10 years ago, it was 15 years ago, it doesn't matter, it's back. And it will assert itself until it is done with you. Definitely part of what resonates with this for me. And I've been especially susceptible to that because I've got a very, very vivid memory. So that's part of the horror. And you went the Nietzschean angle, and I think you're on the right track there. But I'd kind of counterpoint that with more of a Franciscan angle, which is the selfishness of love. That for the love of her son, she is willing to take a handful of other people and essentially torture them indefinitely, even knowing that, I mean, she's not operating under the assumption that these people are real.
Of course, yeah. If you don't, the film takes a very different turn, right?
It takes a very different turn. And at that point, we have a woman torturing herself indefinitely. which has a different kind of moral consequence, a different kind of moral weight, which would make the cabbie's question put that in a very different light. Like, are you done? Are you done? Are you ready to go? Like, are you ready to say, take me to the airport? Are you ready to say, take me to Miami? Are you ready to say anything but the harbor? And in that case, if that is the case, then we're kind of edging into kind of a Jacob's ladder kind of scenario, where this is a very much a purgatory, that this is for her, about her, and ultimately with the ultimate end of her moral redemption. But if these are real people, if she is inflicting real suffering,
and we have no reason to think they're not.
We have no reason to think they're not. Like Sally does not stare beatifically as she is bleeding from a gut shot, and trace your finger on her face saying, "It's okay, I forgive you." Like, there's nothing to indicate that these are not real people, or at the very least, that their deaths should not be regarded as having comparable moral consequence to the deaths of real people. If these are real people, then Jess is reciprocating, constructing this elaborate machine of torture, pain, fear, and death for a prize that she ultimately knows she cannot have. It has been demonstrated to her over and over and over again. You will not make it off into the sunset with your son. How many seagulls are in that pile? If you go 10 feet down the beach, is there another pile of seagulls? How many, maybe there was 100 versions prior to that where she left a single artifact in the lawn. Maybe she never even got into the car. How many times? Who even knows how many times? And here it's hard not to make a video game analogy. How many times have you played Dark Souls? Any of the Dark Souls games?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. How many times do you have to die to that freaking boss?
Yeah, it's a whole game of dying.
Yeah, exactly. It's okay. I made a new character. I walked 3 feet and I die brutally. Okay, next time I walk 5 feet and die brutally. I die brutally 1 foot in because I screwed up. It's that learning through repetition. Except Jess does not. Jess does not learn. She does not progress.
Yeah. And I see what you're saying with the flip side being, it's really like the horror of the flip side of love, right? It's the capacity to love so deeply or so hard that you damage everything else around you, that you take this thing that's supposed to be a sort of fundamentally good thing, and warp it. I guess some way to put it like that, warp it. It becomes sort of because of how you've attached it to maybe regret. I think regret would still play a role even in your view, because regret and love, if they go together, you're going to make some really, really bad decisions. Do you know what I mean? If you're deeply in love with someone, and there's a mistake that's been made and you're able to replicate it, fuck everybody else. A lot of people will just do exactly what Jess did. I feel like they would just be like, oh, well, respawn. I want to see my son.
But that in turn opens another question. And here we get darker still. Does she actually care about her son? Is this actually about seeing her son? Or is this an identity-driven moral question for her? Is she invested in seeing her son happy and well and alive? Which, by the way, there's every indication no. Because she's screaming at him in the car. Mm-hmm. She's losing it all over again. The question is it actually about him, or is it about her and her desire to not be the mother who killed her autistic son? Mm-hmm. Is that an identity chain that she does not want to wear? And that is what this is actually about.
I kind of want to give her the benefit of the doubt. Like, I want to say that when she said in the ship, I'm sorry, but she said, I forget the exact phrase, but it was like, I'm sorry, I have to see. Well, actually, it's important, because if she says I have to see my son, That's could be taken, I think,
She
the way
said,
you're
"I'm
implying.
sorry, I love my son.
I'm sorry, I love my son. Yeah,
I
that's
love my son. I'm
that.
sorry."
I feel like that's everything. I feel like that's kind of that's gonna be the that's going to be the piece that we're going to have to interpret, I think, because I want to give her the benefit of the doubt and say that she's doing this out of regret, which again could go your way also, which could go the bad way we don't want to think about. But I feel like there's I want to fix this. There's an I want to fix this vibe to her, and for good reason. I want to fix this vibe. Not I don't want to be the woman who killed her son.
How do we differentiate between those two externally, though?
Yeah, it's well, especially given how vague her very few comments that sort of point one way or the other are. I guess you don't really know, right? Like you're not. This film's not going to let you know. I'm just going to go with the Mulder interpretation of things and just tell you what I want to believe. Because if it really is the case that we're almost saying that her motivations, like it would be so much worse and so much scary if all her motivations to do the things she's trying to do in the movie were like that, because you have this dual layer shitstorm, like this dual layer horror where not only does she have to go through this Sisyphean thing where she may or may not be killing sentient conscious people every time, but she's doing it for all the wrong reasons. I don't want to think like that. I don't, that sucks.
Conscious sentient people, including her son.
Yeah.
She hasn't just killed all of her friends on the boat, who even knows how many times. And by the way, the necklace tally, that's how many times she's killed her kid, too.
Yeah, see, this is why I didn't want to do this. Now the movie's scarier. You made it scarier. That sucks.
Or we have to deal with it's going to get worse, Noah. I'm sorry. I always do this to you, though. This is like the defining mechanic of our interaction of almost a decade. And this is always who I've been in your life. And I'm sorry.
The bearer of bad news.
But oh shit, I forgot what I was going to say. Well, there you go. You were spared. What were you saying?
Yeah, I just, I felt like, okay, so let's talk about resolution in this film. What would resolve this movie? Because to me, I think the way I saw this film being resolved is, so there's two ways. There's the sort of the film way. The film way is she tells the cab driver, okay, take me anywhere but the harbor. Right. I feel like that is it's over. It happened. Because going back to what the cabbie says when she sees her son and herself sprawled out on the freeway, he says to her, like, let him go, like or something like the boy's beyond help. He's gone.
Yeah.
It is almost like an underscore of it was almost like move on is the way he might as well have been saying that, move on, right? So I feel like if the film offers you anything like a resolution, it's, I don't know, like a kind of stoicism, a kind of accepting of one's fate, right? This again goes maybe back to the sort of Nietzschean thing of just accepting one's fate for what it is. And sort of amor fati. This is what's happened, an acceptance of it, get in the cab and move on. That is how I saw resolution in this film. How did you see resolution in this film?
Much like you. Although this is, it's tempting for me to talk about this in terms of fate, but we're talking about something past tense. We're talking exclusively about something past tense. This is a thing that has already happened. Her son has already been killed. And she has this kind of Faustian pact, this Faustian opportunity to play the game again, knowing that she will get the same result. And as with you, I think the resolution, the end to this is either, and I think either one of these would work. Either she gets in the cab and says, "Take me anywhere but the harbor," or she goes to the harbor and prevents anyone from getting on the boat, or she does something to shut the loop down rather than aggressively seeking it. The whole point of going to the harbor is to get people onto the boat, is to send them in that direction. She has her hand on the wheel, for crying out loud. She is literally steering the boat in the direction that she knows from prior experience will lead to this cycle. Or the second she finds the cabinet full of shotguns.
Boom. Gotcha. So what happens? Okay, so how does this change things for you if it turns out that she says, "Take me anywhere but the harbor," and she goes 30 miles away and ends up right back on the boat through the Sisyphean means. So she offs herself and she wakes up actually on the boat and says, "Whoa, I had another crazy dream. I have a headache. I don't remember what happened." Let's say that happens, right? How does that change anything on your interpretation?
It changes everything.
Okay.
It changes everything. Because as presented, this is a thing up to 10 minutes from the end of the movie. We are presented with this elaborate and unlikely set of circumstances that had been imposed on her. And then the final reveal is they were not imposed on her. They are of her making. And not unwitting construction of this set of circumstances. She knows what she's doing. She knows the consequences to herself and to others, and she is doing this on purpose.
Yeah.
If it instead becomes something that is imposed upon her, then we've got a totally different set of themes. We're talking about
that's how I took it.
The arbitrariness of fate, but
yeah.
That's not what the movie's about.
Yeah, so I mean that was my initial interpretation of things. It was kind of a both and, but it was happening to her, and because it was happening to her, you know, her decision to keep doing it was part her own and part not her own. Like, it's almost like the scenario she was in was given to her, but there's really a billion and one different ways she could go given the scenarios, but she chose something, you know, very similar every single time. So it was kind of both and to me, but I saw more of an emphasis on because of some bad decision she made being put in it. There's a whole bunch of different interpretations I found online where people will say things like, well, she cheated death, because there's that whole story about Aeolus and Sisyphus and all of that shit. I steered kind of far away from that because really we're never really going to know. And I don't think it's super important. I think most everything that's impactful and meaningful in this film happens when you don't think about those things. But, you know, I felt like I still got the vibe, like the film was trying to tell me that there is a kind of fatalism in this. I feel like your interpretation is, let's say, it almost was like it's 100% Jess, 0% happening to her. Would that be how you would look at it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
She
wow.
made this world. She built this world.
Wow. Yeah. So I would say it was something like 80-20. And let me kind of clarify what that means. I felt like she was put in a scenario again where she has a kind of ellipses where she can go all of these different ways, but it all leads back to the same thing, right? So there is an outside force putting her in a scenario like this, whether it's purgatory, whether it's hell, what have you, right? So there is a kind of supernatural thing to this film, but I felt like within that you get to see a person choose the same things over and over again as a way of establishing why she's been put in this scenario to begin with. Does that make sense? That's kind of what I felt like was going on. So I felt like I'm buying what you have to sell to up into a point, right? I'm going, yeah, she is clearly doing all of these things. Really, the more I think about it, the more I think you're right, for all the wrong reasons. And she's putting herself within a particular frame of reference, but I felt like she's still in that scenario ultimately because of decisions that happened external to her. I felt like the film, I just kind of felt like that's what the film was telling me, because it offers her so obviously through the taxi driver a way out. You know what I mean? It's almost like you're in a room. As maybe a better way to put it is, I felt like she was put in a locked room, and what she can do in that locked room, there's a whole bunch of different things, and she just happens to be doing the bad thing in the locked room. But there's a door open, and she can leave it. And to that extent, I felt like she's been put there.
And now it gets so much worse. Sundress Jess, who received an invitation from Greg to go sailing, never makes it to the boat alive. Never puts on a white tank top, a skirt, a pair of booty shorts, and a sweater. The Jess that we follow through the entire movie. Who is she? There are two Jesses in this movie, and they're not in the same way. We've got our sweater Jess, tank top Jess, and coveralls Jess, which is all the same Jess.
Yeah. Yes.
There's a totally separate Jess. The sundress Jess is totally separate. The Jess who had a son is totally separate. The Jess that we know, the Jess that we follow through the movie, through all of these loops, kills sundress Jess and interacts with sundress Jess's son. But we never see her version of the son, which does underline our theory that sundress Jess killed her son.
Yeah.
But in terms of identity, we do have a hard question in the form of, where does the Jess that we are following from the beginning of the movie come from?
Yeah.
And my posit, she has always been in this loop. This Jess has no existence outside of that loop. She is not a morally malformed character, in the sense that she is not dramatically morally deviant from most of us. But here she is in a set of circumstances where it is possible for her to reciprocate the evil that is in her infinitely. She has an opportunity. She always has an opportunity to end the cycle, and she always chooses not to. She always has an opportunity to not torture, murder, kill. For I think very selfish reasons. Because she also kills her son over and over and over and over again. It's easy to say that Jess is the monster in this movie, but for me, part of the point is that Jess is not an exceptionally monstrous person, and that people, full stop, are monstrous. This film makes a pretty good case that love of a child is actually devoid of moral agency. That it is not a moral attribute, that it is reflexive, and in this set of circumstances, overrides every potential moral check, every moral speed bump put in her way. She plows straight over for this presumptive love of a child, but the kind of love that when you look at it is devoid of most of the attributes that we would call love, that we would ascribe to love. She loves her child, and yet is willing to kill him again and again and again.
Well, I think that goes back to, I think now this is making me look at what you said earlier as being maybe more accurate, is that maybe that makes sense. Her doing that makes sense if really her motivation is, I don't want to be the woman who killed my son. Do you know what I mean?
Does Jess love her son, or does she not want to be a bad mother?
Yeah.
And if we take that question outside of the context of this movie, it's a question worth asking.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems to me a question of capacity, though. It seems to me like a question of, something that I think every mom, or really every person, let's say, has, and and shows, and it's not just it again, it's something that I think is that is positive, that is seen socially as positive. Let's put it that way, right? I mean, we have cards and we have days of celebration where a mom celebrates her relationship with her child and a child celebrates their relationship with their mom. And there's this connection there. And it's that connection that is taken out, put in a very separate set of circumstances that same connection doesn't change. It's literally the circumstances that change that can highlight how maybe that connection isn't in and of itself a good thing. I'm just spitballing here, but that's kind of
or that connection is a container, and that its ultimate merit is no greater or less than what is put into that container. That maternal bond can absolutely be the context for a series, an ongoing series of moral decisions, but is not in and of itself it is not in and of itself a moral structure. It is not a beacon from which morality intrinsically radiates. And we see that with her sundress Jess's interactions with her son. The only interactions that we actually see between the woman who is really this kid's mother and the person who is really this kid is screaming, screaming, a backhand. Well, you know what? Your father was an asshole too. You know, that's all we see of their authentic relationship.
Yeah, that's fucking terrifying. How awful would it be if, like, we see Jess go through this over and over again, and, you know, just one day she goes, you know, it dawns on her, you know, I've never been into the ship's hull, into the area where the captain is, in this one particular room that I haven't seen, and she goes in there, and right smack dab in the middle is Honey the fucking cat. That would be I would pay good money to see that film. Honey the cat.
Or they finally make it to the bridge, which kind of funny that they never make it, that at no point in time in the course of this movie does anyone actually make it to the room where this ship gets steered.
Which I think itself, there's some that'll preach. Preach. That'll definitely preach. They
get there and it's actually a broadcasting booth.
Yeah. Steve McHattie sitting there like, Pontypool. Yeah.
Shared universe.
Yeah.
Shared universe.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, so let's this is your film, so I imagine your score for this film is going to be fairly high. Let's score this movie. So let's do it a little differently. In terms of the raw cinematic quality of it being a good film, and I'm going to keep that really vague. That can mean a whole bunch of shit, but if someone comes up to Ben and says, Ben, on a scale of 1 to 10, is this a good film? What do you say? And then also in terms of how scary this film is, 1 to 10. So how scary it is, 1 to 10, like 10 being shit my pants, Noah when he's, 13 watching Event Horizon, scary, and 10 being like, this is a cinematic masterpiece.
I'm going to give it a 9 on the okay, well, scary, I'm going to give it a 9.
Okay.
Because it is a movie that is exactly as scary as what you are willing to invest in unpacking it. The more time you spend with this movie, the scarier it gets. The more you try to. This is probably the only movie I can think of that is scarier if you take notes. Only movie I can think of where that is true. It's the only movie that is not less scary if you hit the pause button and go away for half an hour and think about it. It's actually worse. Like, viewers, if the first time you watch this, watch it all the way through. Do not hit pause. It is so much worse if you hit pause. Also, the only movie I can think of where that's true. On the technical front, oh my goodness, I feel like you could teach classes.
Yeah, this was a really low budget movie.
Film alone, they spent nothing on it. They spent nothing on this movie, and it's immaculate. It's immaculate. Um, on the technical front, they're keeping track of an enormous amount of information, and they never drop the ball. They don't. They never drop the ball, and they never show you something that you shouldn't see. And especially telling for me, and we didn't could have gotten into this earlier, but we don't tend to dive too deep into the technical analysis, the filmmaking aspect of some of this. When you rewatch this, because I know you will, and I know I will, the next time you rewatch this, pay attention to the camera work, because each version of Jess has her own style of camera movement. The camera work it's subtle and it's fantastic. The editing is immaculate. This is one of the best edited features I can think of off the top of my head. On technical front, giving it bonus points based on the amount of money that they actually had to spend. I give it a 10. I have seen everything this writer-director has done since, and they're all good. They're all good. Christopher Smith, if his name is attached, see it. It's absolutely worth seeing.
Okay, so on the fear factor, I'd probably give this an 8, just because I didn't I didn't see it the same way you did. I'm starting to now. It's starting to hit me. But one of the things that you said stuck with me, and that is the more you think about it, the more it actually becomes a little more terrifying. And I think that's true even on the initial sort of maybe sophomoric way I interpreted the film. I kind of felt like that, I went to sleep going, well, she does this, like, damn. Like, if I was in a scenario like that, it really prompted me to think what I would do and how that would work. But just thinking about every decision she made and how on your interpretation of things, it just underscores not the irrationality, but it underscores the horror of the loop, of the decision, of the self-imposed loop. Like, the more if anything you discover, like anything you and I think of, let's say after this, and we go, oh, I wish I would have said that we discover, is going to be taken in light of, oh man, that's even worse. Like, you're never going to go, oh, well, like, she could have done this. That would have been like, that's better. You're going to go, oh man, that sort of implies,
we're never going to find something out about this movie and say, oh, Noah, I just figured this out. It's actually a comedy.
Yeah.
It's actually,
yeah.
And now I feel great watching this movie. I laugh the whole way. No. Everything you find is worse. Everything you find in this movie is worse. And for me, the essential, like, and bless them for not rubbing your nose in it. Bless them for not rubbing our nose in it. The essential horrific revelation is that when you jump back to the beginning of the movie, the number of Sallys that you've seen, but more importantly, the number of lockets that you've seen. Now, I've got to give credit. Celine was the one who really dragged a highlighter over this one for me. The number of lockets that you see is not only the number of times that she has killed the sundress version of herself, it's a number of times that she has killed her son. And she is still doing this.
Yeah, that really is, when you consider that really is the primary vehicle, I think, of interpreting everything else, right? Because if you really love your son, and it's killing him has to be over and over and over and over again, has to be taken in light of maybe something else. And I think what you offered is probably, the more I think about it, a very good thing to offer, which is I don't want to go being the mom who killed her son. I got to fix this. It's not so much a love of her son. If it was a love of her son, she stopped killing him. She stopped doing the loop. She'd stop doing all of this, right? That's a simple way to put it. Yeah, that becomes a very central vehicle for interpreting this movie. Seeing that, I would give on the technical side, in terms of like overall, the film struck me as like a Pontypool-esque sort of movie, a 9.5 to me, and I say that because they were both extremely low budget. They were shot immaculately. The acting was superb. I feel like any one actor kind of being shitty in this movie would have fucked it up. It would have made it really classified as a B movie, straight to, a DVD piece of shit sort of film that you look back on and just go, oh yeah, it's one of those movies you watch if it's just on, right? If you saw, for example, who's the guy in it? The Australian guy who's kind of famous now. Oh heaven, he's not Thor, but I think he's related to the fellow
Hemsworth,
his brother. Like, let's say the acting would have been really shoddy on his part. I feel like any of those actors having bad acting, Melissa George is, I think, a great actress. So I'm not too, I wouldn't be worried about the main person being shitty. But let's say anyone else, you kind of go, oh, this is one of those teeny horror movies where it loses so much credibility if you have bad acting in this kind of film. So there was really good acting. The shots of the ship were fantastic. They were haunting. It felt very isolated. I love horror movies that give you that feeling of you're trapped and you can't leave, and they do it well. A ship is even better to me. It just had all those elements that make you do this, even without thinking of the fact that this woman is looping constantly and killing her son and her friends. If you just take the atmosphere of the film, there's an episode of the X-Files that I noted that it made me feel like, Bermuda Triangle episode that was very similar. It was a really creepy film, and it was shot very well. So I'd give it on the technical side a 9.5. On the fear side, given my initial kind of interpretation of it being more external and not more of a self-imposed loop, we'll call it. If I look at it that way, I'm going to give it an 8. But if I really go back and take a long, hard look at that and try to find more of that in the movie, I can tell you right now that the score would definitely go up, because I feel like the entire film is not a monster coming at you. It's you, you the monster going at the world. It's inverted. I mean, so before we even go, I guess what I want to ask to you is, if you could sum up in, let's say, 2 minutes or less, what the ultimate fear that this movie brings out, the thing that is so scary about this movie, the summation of it, what would it be?
The most fundamental, and the one that I self-apply. The entire movie, we had talked about situations in which this movie would turn out differently, in which the loop breaks down. And we were talking about actions, but there's another way that it breaks down. And that is if Jess recognizes that this is not a thing being done to her, this is a thing she is doing. And her incapacity to recognize that is part of what keeps this whole thing going. And for me, that is the scary thing. I am not fully conscious of the line between what is happening to me versus what I am making happen. And that I do not know where the burden of moral agency in that lies, and cannot, which is inherently horrifying to me.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's horrifying in the sense of its applicability, that there's so many avenues of one's life that kind of monster, for lack, right, just be poetic from it, or that monster can rear its ugly head, right? Relationships with others, not just your son. It's clearly not just a monster that shows itself in spousal or child rearing ways. I mean, it could be any relationship.
That we have the capacity to be pushed along, carried on the inertia of our choices, even choices that we are making at that moment, is horrifying. For me, the foundation. The foundation is that indeterminacy of, is this a thing that is being done to me? Is this a thing that is happening? Is this a thing that I am doing? And that there are so many times in our lives, the majority of hours clocked in our lives, when we're too busy dealing with the situation to stop and ask that question. Is this something that I'm doing, or is this something that's being done to me, or is this a thing that's just happening? Jess doesn't pause to take a breath in this entire movie. She does not stop. She never does not know what to do next. And she is never not moving to the next thing to do. She is a profoundly anti-contemplative character.
Yeah, and that so perfectly encapsulates the tagline of this film, which I initially thought was kind of dumb, but it makes like really good sense thinking about what the actual fear is in this movie. Fear comes in waves, right? Like riding the inertia of your own choices. Like that's completely accidental, I'm sure, on their part, but I think that that's a really good way to close out and think about this movie.
I feel like Triangle is the horror movie that everyone should have seen, but nobody did. Nobody has. I can count on my fingers the number of people outside of my household who have even heard of it. And that's criminal.
So thanks for watching the Deadly Analysis podcast. If you liked what you saw, shoot us a like on Facebook, leave a comment below, and check out some of our other content. Next week, we are going to be doing the film Compliance, which is going to be a very different sort of movie than I think some of the others we've been doing. All right. Well, thank you for watching, and tune in next week.